The wave rose above him like the hand of God. Elias couldn't breathe. His lungs were full of salt water. His boat was breaking apart beneath him. Lightning split the sky, and for one frozen moment he saw death coming for him. His hands slipped on the rope. This was it. This was how he would die. And the only thing running through his mind was the image of his 7-year-old daughter's face whispering, "Papa, can you catch me just one big fish?" He'd made her a promise, and now he was about to break it. Forever. How did a simple fisherman end up here, miles from shore, fighting for his life in the worst storm anyone had seen in years? Why would a father risk everything, his life, his future, his family's only provider, for a promise he knew he might not be able to keep? And what happened in the hours after this moment would change not just his life, but the way an entire village understood what it means to love someone. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about a storm. It's a story about what you're willing to sacrifice when the people you love are counting on you. And by the end, you might see your own struggles in a completely different light. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Elias ended up in that storm, fighting for his life, we need to go back to where it all started, back to the hunger. Once upon a time, in a poor fishing village where the sea met the sky, there lived a man named Elias. He was not famous. He was not wealthy. He wasn't particularly strong or clever or blessed with good fortune. But he carried something that weighed more than any net full of fish: the responsibility of being a father. Elias had a wife named Maria and 3 children. 2 boys and a little girl named Sophia, who was barely 7 years old and still believed her father could do anything. The village they lived in was simple. Most families survived on whatever the sea was willing to give. When the fish were abundant, there was laughter. When the fish were scarce, there was silence. And recently, there had been a lot of silence. Every morning while the world was still dark, Elias would wake up. Not because he wanted to, not because he loved the sea or the adventure, but because his children needed to eat. He'd slip out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Maria. He'd pull on his worn coat that smelled like salt and fish. He'd grab his nets, patched and repatched so many times they were more repair than original, and he'd walk down to the shores, where his small wooden boat waited in the darkness. The boat wasn't much. The paint had faded years ago. The wood was soft in places where the water had gotten in. But it floated, and that was enough. Elias would push it into the cold water, climb in, and row out into the darkness. Alone. Always alone. Not for glory, not for adventure, not for the romance of the sea that poets talk about, for survival, for the chance to come home with enough fish to sell at the market, enough to buy bread, enough to keep his children from going to bed with their stomachs cramping from hunger. That's all he wanted, just enough. And for years it had worked. The sea had been kind, or at least fair. Elias would catch fish. Not always a lot, but enough. Enough to get by. Enough to see his children smile when he came home. But something changed. Nobody knew why. Maybe the fish had moved to deeper waters. Maybe the currents had shifted. Maybe it was just bad luck. But for 4 weeks straight, Elias's nets came up empty. Day 1, he caught 3 small fish. Tomorrow will be better, he told himself. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, 1 fish barely bigger than his hand. Day 4, 5, 6, empty nets. By the end of the first week, Elias started to worry. By the end of the second week, his children started asking questions. By the end of the third week, the hunger set in, and by the 4th week, desperation had wrapped its cold fingers around his throat. Every evening, Elias would return to shore, and every evening the same scene would play out. His children would be waiting at the doorway of their small hut. They'd hear his footsteps on the path. Their faces would light up with hope. Maybe today Papa caught something, and then they'd see his face. They'd see the basket, empty or nearly empty. The light in their eyes would dim just a little, just enough for Elias to notice. "It's okay, Papa," his oldest son would say, trying to be brave, trying to be the man of the house when his father wasn't there. "Tomorrow," his middle son would add, squeezing his father's hand. But Sophia, the youngest, would just look up at him with those big, trusting eyes. She never said it was okay. She never said tomorrow. She just believed, still believed, that her father would figure it out, and that belief was a weight heavier than any stone. Maria, his wife, was a miracle worker. She'd take the 1 or 2 small fish Elias brought home and somehow make it feed 5 people. She'd boil them into a soup, adding water, adding old vegetables she'd saved, adding hope and prayer and whatever else invisible things a mother adds when she's trying to keep her children from starving. The soup got thinner every week, the bread got sliced thinner, the portions got smaller. And through it all, Maria smiled. "We have enough," she'd say, serving the children first, giving them the biggest portions, taking almost nothing for herself. "We're blessed," she'd say, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But at night, when the children were asleep, Elias would see her. He'd see her hand resting on her stomach, trying to quiet the hunger. He'd see her eyes, tired, worried, scared. He'd see her looking at their children, counting their ribs that were starting to show, watching their energy fade day by day, and he'd see her looking at him, not with blame but with something worse, hope. Hope that he'd figure it out. Hope that tomorrow would be different. Hope that he was still the man she'd married, the provider, the protector, the father. The worst part was the nights. Elias would lie awake in the darkness, listening to his children try to sleep while their stomachs rumbled. Listening to them shift and turn, unable to get comfortable because hunger gnaws at you from the inside. Listening to his youngest, Sophia, whimper softly in her sleep. And listening to his own thoughts, which were the loudest of all. "You're failing them. What kind of father can't feed his own children? They're depending on you, and you're letting them down. Every day, you're letting them down." The ceiling of their hut had a water stain that looked like a face. Elias would stare at it for hours, asking it questions it couldn't answer. What am I doing wrong? Why won't the fish come? How much longer can we survive like this? Am I going to watch my children starve? That last question haunted him most. If the nights were hard, the days at the docks were worse. The other fishermen noticed. Of course they noticed. At first they were sympathetic. "Bad luck, Elias. It happens to everyone. Don't worry, brother. The fish will return." But as the weeks went on, the sympathy turned to something else, pity, then judgment, then mockery. "Maybe you've angered the sea somehow," old Marco said one day, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe the fish can smell desperation," another laughed. "My grandfather used to say that when a man loses his luck, it never comes back," someone else added. Elias would stand there mending his nets, saying nothing. What could he say? They were right in a way. He had lost his luck. The fish weren't coming, and maybe, just maybe, he was cursed. But the worst came from his neighbor, Paolo. Paolo was a successful fisherman. His nets always came up full. His children were well fed. His boat was new. One afternoon, as Elias was preparing to go out, Paolo walked over. "Elias," he said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I've been thinking. Yes, maybe it's time to consider other options." "Other options?" Paolo lowered his voice, glancing around. "My cousin runs a fish market in the next town. He needs someone to clean fish, gut them, prepare them for sale. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady. It pays." Elias felt something twist in his chest. You're saying I should give up fishing. I'm saying your family needs to eat. Paulo's voice was kind, but the words cut like razors. Pride doesn't fill empty stomachs, brother. And there it was, the unspoken truth everyone had been dancing around. Elias was failing as a fisherman. Maybe it was time to admit defeat. That night, Elias sat outside his hut long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Paulo's words echoed in his mind. Pride doesn't fill empty stomachs. Maybe he was right. Maybe clinging to his identity as a fisherman, as his father's son, as a man of the sea, was just selfishness dressed up as tradition. Maybe the brave thing, the loving thing, would be to give up the sea. Take the job gutting fish for Paulo's cousin. Swallow his pride, do whatever it takes. But something in him resisted. It wasn't pride, or maybe it was. But it was something else, too. It was the memory of his father teaching him to read the tides. It was the memory of the first fish he ever caught, and how his father's face had beamed with joy. It was the identity he'd built his entire life around, the feeling of being good at something, of having a place in the world, of having a purpose. If he gave up the sea, who would he be? Just another broken man working someone else's job, just another failure who couldn't provide for his family the way a man should. But if he kept fishing, his children might starve. The choice was impossible. Before we go any further, I need to say something. Right now, 73% of you are watching without subscribing. Think about that for a second. If Elias could fight a storm for his daughter's promise, you can take 2 seconds to subscribe. Let's continue. Days blurred together. Elias kept going out, kept casting his nets, kept coming home empty-handed. His children stopped waiting at the door. They knew what to expect. Maria stopped pretending the meals were enough. There wasn't enough pretending in the world. The other fishermen stopped mocking him. They just looked away now, embarrassed for him. And Elias felt himself breaking. Not all at once, not dramatically, just cracking. Little pieces falling away each day. His hope, his identity, his sense of purpose. He believed that he was a good father. And then came the 28th night. Elias was sitting outside their hut, his head in his hands, staring at nothing. He'd made a decision. Tomorrow he'd go talk to Paulo's cousin. He'd take the job. He'd give up. It was over. And then he felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down. Sophia, his youngest daughter, 7 years old, with tangled hair and a dress that was too big because she'd lost weight. She should have been asleep, but here she was, looking up at him with those eyes that still somehow held trust. "Papa," she whispered. "Yes, little one." His voice cracked. "Why aren't you sleeping?" "I had a dream." "A dream?" Sophia nodded, squeezing his hand tighter. "I dreamed I was eating a big fish, Papa. A huge one, bigger than my arms could hold." Her eyes lit up, the first real light he'd seen in them for weeks. "And my belly was so full and warm, and I wasn't cold anymore, and Mama was singing like she used to." She looked up at him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Papa, can you catch one tomorrow? Just one big fish?" Something shattered inside Elias's chest. Not broke, shattered. Because in that moment he realized something terrible. His daughter still believed in him. After 4 weeks of failure, after watching him come home empty-handed day, after going to bed hungry night after night, she still believed her father could do anything. And that belief, that pure, innocent, unshakable belief, was either going to save him or destroy him. Elias pulled Sophia onto his lap. He held her close, feeling how light she'd become, how fragile. And he made a decision, not a careful decision, not a wise decision, a desperate decision. "Yes, Sophia," he heard himself say. "Tomorrow, I will bring you that fish." Sophia's face transformed. She threw her small arms around his neck. "I knew you would, Papa. I knew it." She kissed his cheek and ran back inside, suddenly full of energy, probably already imagining the feast they'd have tomorrow. And Elias sat there, alone in the darkness, wondering what he'd just promised. Because Elias knew something Sophia didn't. The fish weren't near the shore anymore. He'd tried every spot, every technique, every secret his father had taught him. If there were fish to be caught, they were in one place only: the deep waters. The place where the old fishermen would shake their heads and make the sign against evil. The place where the currents were unpredictable and the weather could turn in minutes. The place where every few years a fisherman would venture out and the sea would simply keep them. Their boats would be found weeks later, empty, or they wouldn't be found at all. Everyone in the village knew the unspoken rule: you don't go to the deep waters unless you're prepared to never come back. But Elias had just promised his daughter a fish, and a father's promise to his child is heavier than fear, stronger than wisdom, more powerful than the will to survive. That night, Elias didn't sleep at all. He sat at the edge of his boat, looking out at the black ocean. Behind him in the hut, his family slept. His children dreamed of food. Maria probably lay awake, worrying. Sophia probably smiled in her sleep, imagining the big fish her father would bring. And Elias made peace with the possibility that he might die tomorrow. Not dramatically, not with some grand acceptance, just quietly. The way a man does when he's out of options. If he stayed near the shore, he'd catch nothing. Sophia would wake up excited, and he'd have to watch that excitement die when he returned empty-handed. Again. And tomorrow night he'd have to tell Paolo's cousin yes. He'd have to give up the sea, give up himself. Watch his daughter's belief in him die slowly, day by day, as he became just another broken man working someone else's job. Or he could go to the deep waters. Maybe, just maybe, he'd catch something. Maybe he'd keep his promise. Maybe he'd come home a hero instead of a failure. Or maybe the sea would take him. And if it did, at least his family would have a story to tell. At least Sophia would remember a father who fought for her, instead of a father who gave up. The math was simple, really. Die slowly on land, watching his family starve and his daughter's belief die. Or risk dying quickly at sea with a chance, however small, of redemption. Before sunrise, while the village still slept, Elias stood up. He checked his nets one more time. They were old, patched, barely holding together. He pushed his boat into the water, the cold bit into his legs, and then he started rowing, but not toward the usual fishing grounds, straight out into the open sea. A few early risers saw him. He heard their voices carrying across the water. "Where's he going? That's not the right direction. Is he heading for the deep waters? Someone should stop him. He's lost his mind. By tonight we'll be searching for his body." But Elias heard none of it. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. His arms rode with mechanical determination. Each stroke takes him farther from safety. Each stroke takes him closer to either salvation or death. He didn't know which, and he didn't care anymore. Elias rode for hours, past the point where the village disappeared behind him, past the point where the safe fishing grounds ended, past the point where any sensible man would turn back. Until there was nothing in any direction but water and sky. The sea here was different, darker. The water wasn't the blue-green of the shallows. It was deep, almost black, like looking into an endless well. When he finally stopped rowing, his arms were screaming. His hands were bloody from the oars. But he'd made it. The deep waters, the place where fish were still abundant because no one dared to come here to catch them. Elias cast his nets with trembling hands. The net sank deeper, deeper, deeper. He couldn't even see how far down they went. And then he waited. For the first time in 4 weeks, Elias felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. For 2 hours the sea was perfect. Gentle waves rocked the boat, the sun warmed his back, a breeze kept him cool. Elias even smiled, something he hadn't done in weeks. Maybe this would work. Maybe he'd actually pull it off. He imagined coming home. Imagined the nets full of fish. Imagined Sophia's face when she saw them. Imagined Maria's relief. Imagined sleeping without the weight of failure crushing his chest. For 2 hours, he let himself hope. And then, on the horizon, he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a cloud, a dark line, thin and distant. But it was moving, growing, spreading across the sky like spilled ink. The wind shifted, the temperature dropped, the gentle waves started to grow restless, and Elias felt ice-cold dread flood his veins. He'd seen storms before, every fisherman had. But not like this, not this fast, not this dark. He grabbed his nets, desperate to pull them in quickly and row back before... But it was already too late. The storm hit like the fist of an angry god. One moment the sky was gray, the next it was black. The wind went from a breeze to a roar in seconds. The waves went from gentle swells to towering walls. Lightning cracked across the sky, so close Elias could smell the burn of it. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it felt like the world was splitting apart. Elias pulled at his nets frantically. His hands moved faster than they ever had. Get the nets in, get the nets in, get them in and row! But the nets were caught on something. They wouldn't budge. Another wave crashed over the boat. Salt water filled his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He coughed, gasped, pulled harder. Snap! The net broke. Half of it disappeared into the dark water. And Elias saw, in the split second before another wave hit, that it was empty anyway, still empty, even here. And that brings us back to where we started. The wave rising above him like the hand of God. Elias couldn't breathe. His lungs were full of salt water. His boat was breaking apart beneath him. His hands slipped on the rope. Is this how I die? He asked himself. And Sophia's voice echoed in his mind. Just one big fish, Papa. He'd failed her. He'd failed all of them. Wait, stop. Before we get to what happens next, and trust me, you need to see what happens next. I need to talk to you. Someone's life might actually change from hearing this story, but they won't hear it if you don't do your part. Hit the like button, right now, not for me, for them. Now let's see if Elias survives. For hours Elias fought, not to catch fish, not to sail home, not even to reach shore. Just to stay alive, just to breathe, just to survive one more second. The waves were relentless. They came from every direction, as if the sea had decided to kill him personally. One wave would crash from the left, throwing him against the side of the boat. Before he could recover, another would hit from the right, then from behind, filling the boat with water. Then from the front, nearly capsizing him. His hands bled from gripping the ropes. The salt water made the wounds burn like fire. His ribs were broken. He could feel them grinding with every breath. His body went numb from the cold, but he held on. Because every time he thought about letting go, every time his fingers started to slip, he'd see their faces. Sophia, his sons, Maria, they're waiting for me. They're counting on me. I can't leave them. But the sea didn't care about love. The storm didn't care about promises. And Elias was just a man. His strength was running out. His grip was failing. His will was breaking. And then came the biggest wave yet. Elias looked up and saw it rising in the darkness, not like a wave, like a mountain, like the wall at the end of the world. There was no surviving this one. Time slowed down. In that frozen moment, Elias thought about his life. He thought about his father, teaching him to fish. He thought about Maria on their wedding day, smiling like the sun. He thought about holding each of his children for the first time, feeling their tiny hearts beating against his chest. He thought about Sophia's whisper, just one big fish, Papa. And he thought, I tried. God knows I tried. But then something happened. From somewhere deep inside, from a place beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, beyond fear, beyond reason, Elias found his voice. He screamed into the storm, into the face of death itself, into the universe that had taken everything from him. Not today. Not yet. His voice was barely a whisper against the roar of wind and waves. My children still need me. Louder now, stronger. I made a promise. And then the wave came down. Everything went black. Elias didn't know if he was alive or dead. He didn't know if he was underwater or above it. He didn't know which way was up. He didn't know anything except darkness and cold and pain. And then, when Elias opened his eyes, the world had changed. The storm was gone. The sea was calm, impossibly, almost mockingly calm. The sky was the color of pink and gold. The sun was rising, painting everything in soft light, beautiful, peaceful, like the violence of the night had been a dream. But Elias's boat was destroyed. The mast was snapped in half, hanging by splinters. The nets were torn to ribbons, floating in the water like ghosts. His body was covered in cuts and bruises. Every inch of him screamed in agony. He looked at what remained of his nets. Empty, still empty. Always empty, no fish, no miracle, nothing to show for nearly dying, nothing to bring home to Sophia. He'd failed. After everything, after risking his life, after fighting the storm, after refusing to die. He'd still failed. For a long moment, Elias just sat there in his broken boat. Part of him wanted to slip into the water, to let the sea take him after all. What's the point of going back? What do I even say to her? Sorry, Sophia. Papa fought death itself and still couldn't catch you a fish. But then he remembered something. Something Sophia had said mixed in with the words about the fish. She'd said, and Mama was singing like she used to. Not because of the fish, just singing. Happy, the way she used to be. Because he was there. And suddenly Elias understood something he should have understood weeks ago. His children didn't need him to be perfect. They didn't need him to catch every fish. They didn't need him to solve every problem. They just needed him. Alive. Present. There. One last thing before you go. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own struggles, if it changed even one thought in your mind, and you leave without sharing it, you're robbing someone else of that same experience. Someone in your life is going through their own storm right now. Someone is fighting their own battle. Someone is about to give up. And this story might be exactly what they need to hear. But they'll never hear it if you don't share it. So here's what you're going to do. Share this video. Send it to someone. Comment below the storm you're facing. Just one word. We'll understand. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we make videos like this that actually matter. Don't just consume and leave. Be part of something bigger. Your move.